All right, so welcome back for another deep dive with us. And today we're going deep on a topic that maybe doesn't sound all that exciting at first glance.
Right.
But trust me on this one, it's way more interesting than it sounds. Airport wildlife hazard management.
Buckle up.
Yeah, buckle up. We've got some excerpts here from a manual published by the International Civil Aviation Organization. That's the ICAO.
Right.
And let me tell you, it is packed with surprises.
Yeah, you're right. It's really fascinating stuff. It's not just about shooing away pigeons or something like that.
Right.
We're talking any animal here, big or small, wild or domestic, anything that could potentially cause trouble for aircraft. That's what we're talking about.
So hypothetically, even my Chihuahua could be considered a hazard?
Well, I mean, size definitely matters.
Okay.
A Chihuahua is not going to pose the same risk as a flock of geese, let's say.
Right.
But,
I see what you're saying.
the point is airports have to consider a really wide range of animals when they're developing their safety plans.
So it's not just about what kind of animal it is.
Right.
It's also their behavior, how many there are.
Exactly.
How close they get to the planes.
It's all part of the equation. And to really kind of appreciate how this whole system works, it helps to kind of take a quick trip back in time.
Okay.
Did you know that Orville Wright, of the Wright brothers fame,
Oh, kidding?
actually had a bird strike way back in 1905?
Seriously? That's practically the dawn of aviation.
It is. And sadly, just a few years later, in 1912, Calbraith Perry Rogers,
Okay.
who was the first pilot to fly across the United States, actually died as a result of a bird strike.
Oh, wow. That's tragic. It really puts in perspective how long this has been an issue.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's not just a historical curiosity either. These early incidents actually drove some of the very first design changes in aircraft.
Interesting.
For example, there was a crash in 1962 that involved a Vickers Viscount and some whistling swans.
Wow.
And that led to modifications in how the horizontal stabilizers are built to make them more resistant to bird strikes.
So they were learning from these tragedies and actually using that knowledge to improve aircraft safety.
Exactly. And that evolution continues to this day. I mean, even high-profile events like the Miracle on the Hudson back in 2009,
Right.
where an Airbus A320 hit a flock of Canada geese.
Yeah, I remember that.
Those are reminders of how important vigilance and ongoing innovation are in this field. By the way, that incident with the Miracle on the Hudson, that really spurred a lot of investment in bird detecting radar technology.
Wow. It's incredible to see how these incidents have directly shaped the way that we approach airport safety. Speaking of which, this manual that you've provided talks a lot about having a proactive approach.
Right.
What exactly does that mean in the context of airport wildlife hazard management?
Yeah, well, it means moving beyond simply reacting to incidents and instead focusing on preventing them in the first place. Every airport, every single one, needs to have its own, we call it a tailored wildlife hazard management program, or a WHMP. And it's based on a really thorough assessment of the risks that are specific to that location.
Right.
Think of it like a blueprint for keeping wildlife and aircraft safely separated.
That makes a lot of sense because different airports are going to have different environments, different types of wildlife.
Of course.
Different challenges, really.
Absolutely. But something I'm kind of curious about is, what are some of those common factors that make airports attractive to wildlife in the first place?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. You know me, I'm all about understanding the why behind animal behavior.
Oh, absolutely. And the manual breaks it down into three main categories.
Okay.
Food, water, and shelter.
Yeah.
Basic stuff.
The things that we all need to survive.
Exactly. So let's start with food. Even things that seem harmless, like landscaping choices, have a huge impact.
I wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah, like certain types of vegetation, those with berries or seeds.
Oh, okay.
That's basically a buffet for birds.
Right.
And even the insects that those plants attract can be a food source for other animals.
So even the plants around the airport have to be carefully considered?
Oh, absolutely. And then there's agriculture. Fields that are near an airport,
right,
depending on what's planted there and how it's managed, can either attract or deter certain species.
Oh, interesting.
And then, of course, we can't forget about waste management.
Oh.
Landfills are notorious for attracting birds.
Right.
And even something as simple as an unsecured trash can on airport property can become this unexpected feast.
So it sounds like minimizing food sources is a huge part of the strategy here.
Oh, absolutely. But, water is just as important as food.
Oh, okay.
And we're not just talking big bodies of water here like lakes.
Right.
We're talking puddles, ditches, even wastewater treatment plants. All of these can be appealing to certain animals.
Interesting.
The manual actually gives some really good examples of how airports will go in and modify these water sources to make them less accessible to animals.
Okay.
Things like, covering them with netting or making the banks steeper.
Oh, okay.
So, it's not just about getting rid of the water source completely. It's about making it less hospitable to wildlife.
Right. Makes sense.
Exactly. And then there's shelter.
Okay.
Birds in particular.
Yeah.
They can be really resourceful when it comes to finding a good nesting spot.
I bet an airport building would look pretty inviting to them.
Oh, more than you might think.
Really?
Yeah. Buildings, hangars, even parked aircraft, all of these things can provide excellent nesting spots. And airports have to get creative to make these areas less appealing,
Okay.
Design modifications, netting,
Right.
all sorts of strategies.
It's fascinating how every aspect of the airport environment has to be considered, from the landscaping to the buildings. It's really incredible.
And making the airport less attractive. That's just part of the story.
Right? There's got to be more to it than that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are also all these active techniques for discouraging wildlife from, getting too close for comfort.
Okay. Now you've got my attention. Let's dive into those.
Okay. Well, one of the most common approaches is using audio repellents. You've probably heard those loud bangs around airports.
Oh, yeah.
Those are pyrotechnics.
Yeah.
They're specifically designed to scare birds away. And there's a whole science behind using different types of cartridges
Wow.
to create different effects, depending on the situation.
So it's not just about making a loud noise. It's about using the right kind of noise at the right time.
You got it. You got it. And then you've got propane cannons, which also create a loud bang.
Okay.
But they're much more effective when they're used sparingly.
Oh.
Animals, they can get used to the sound if they hear it all the time.
It's like when you're trying to train your dog to ignore certain sounds, right? If there's no consequence associated with the sound, they just eventually tune it out.
That's a great analogy. That's a great analogy. And then you've got things like distress calls.
Okay.
Which are recordings of specific bird species in distress.
Oh, so they're playing sounds of birds being attacked by predators or something like that?
Exactly. Exactly. It might sound a little squeaky.
A little bit, yeah.
But it can be incredibly effective.
Right.
Because birds are, naturally programmed to react to these kinds of calls.
I have to admit, that's pretty clever. So we've covered ways to scare animals away with sound. What about visual deterrence?
Yeah. Well, you might be surprised to hear this, but one of the simplest visual deterrents is just having humans around.
Really?
Yeah. Animals, they're generally wary of us.
Right.
Especially in an unfamiliar environment like an airport.
So it's like a built-in security system in a way.
It really is. Then there are other things like, scarecrows, hawk effigies, reflective tape, but those things tend to have limited effectiveness because just like with the sound.
They get used to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Animals get used to them over time. For a more high-tech approach, there are lasers, drones, but those things require very careful regulation.
I can see how those could cause more problems than they solve.
Yeah, if they're not used properly.
Exactly.
Right. Are there any other maybe unexpected methods for deterring wildlife?
Well, one technique that might surprise you is using trained predators.
Wait, they use animals to control other animals at airports?
They do. Dogs and falcons, for example.
Oh, wow.
They can be incredibly effective at chasing away birds or other wildlife.
Yeah.
Of course, these animals, they're highly trained.
Yeah.
Their handlers are experienced professionals.
Right.
It's not just a matter of letting loose a pack of wild animals on the runway.
Right, of course.
Right. So it's all very controlled.
Yeah.
It's a very specific technique. That's good to know. So it seems like airports really have a pretty diverse toolkit when it comes to keeping wildlife at a safe distance. What happens if those methods aren't enough?
Well, in those cases, trapping and relocating the animals is often the next step.
Okay.
And that's generally considered a more humane approach than lethal control, which is always a last resort, and it's very strictly regulated.
That's good to hear that they prioritize humane methods whenever possible.
Absolutely.
But I imagine, all of this, from modifying the habitat to actively deterring animals, must take a lot of coordination, a lot of technology.
Oh, is that right? You're absolutely right. And this is where technology really starts to shine in the world of airport wildlife hazard management, We're talking cutting-edge tools that are helping airports monitor and manage wildlife in ways that were just unimaginable a few decades ago.
Okay, now you've really piqued my curiosity. Let's talk tech. What kind of tools are we talking about here?
Well, imagine this. Using satellites to keep our sky safe.
Okay, now that's just cool. Tell me more.
It's not science fiction. Airports are using satellite imagery to monitor land use changes around their perimeters.
Okay.
Like, say, a new landfill pops up nearby. They can use satellite data to assess the potential impact on bird activity.
Oh, interesting.
And then they can proactively adjust their management strategies.
So it's like having an early warning system for potential wildlife hazards.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. What else? Let's see. Another really powerful tool is something called GIS.
GIS?
Yeah, it stands for Geographic Information System. Think of it as like a high-tech map that allows them to analyze data related to specific locations.
Okay, I have to admit, GIS sounds a little technical. Can you give me an example of how it's actually used?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Remember earlier you were asking about understanding animal behavior.
Right.
Well, GIS can help with that. Airports can use it to track things like bird migration patterns or identify areas where certain species are likely to, hang out.
So they can predict those high-risk zones and focus their efforts where they're going to be most effective.
Exactly. And speaking of prediction, radar is another game changer. Airports have these specialized radar systems that can detect and track birds in real time, even at night or in low visibility.
That's crucial, especially with how many flights take off and land after dark.
Absolutely. Radar gives those air traffic controllers vital information about bird activity, so they have more time to react, adjust flight paths if necessary. And the technology is getting even more sophisticated. Some systems can even distinguish between different types of birds, which helps them assess the level of risk they pose.
It's like giving the airport an extra set of eyes, constantly scanning for potential hazards.
That's a great way to put it. And don't forget about cameras. Airports are increasingly using cameras to monitor those hard-to-reach areas, like rooftops or wooded areas that might be attractive to wildlife.
So between satellites, GIS, radar, and cameras, they've got pretty much every angle covered.
It's pretty amazing, Reed.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how technology is being used to improve airport safety in these ways.
It really is.
Yeah.
All of this technology, it's only effective if the information is communicated clearly and efficiently to everyone who needs it.
Right, because you've got air traffic controllers, pilots, wildlife control personnel. All of these people need to be on the same page.
Absolutely, yeah. And to make sure everyone has the information they need, airports use a multi-layered communication system.
Okay.
One of the key elements is what we call the ATIS, or the Automatic Terminal Information Service.
ATIS, okay.
And this is a continuous broadcast of essential information,
Okay.
including any reported wildlife hazards.
So pilots are getting real-time updates even before they take off.
That's right. It keeps them informed about any potential issues they might encounter during their flight. And then there are NOTAMs, or notices to airmen.
NOTAMs.
Yeah, which are more detailed warnings about persistent hazards like ongoing construction or a known bird nesting area, that sort of thing.
So the ATIS is for immediate updates, and NOTAMs are more for longer-term advisories.
You got it. And then, of course, there are pilot reports. Pilots have this unique perspective from the air.
Right.
And if they see something concerning, they can report it immediately to air traffic control.
It sounds like a really collaborative effort, with everyone playing a role in keeping the skies safe.
It really is. And all of this information that's gathered, for all these different sources,
Yeah.
well, that's where the analysis comes in.
Right.
All of that data from the satellites, GIS, radar, cameras, pilot reports, all of it is constantly being analyzed and used to update the airport's wildlife hazard management program.
So it's like a continuous cycle of monitoring, assessing, and adjusting their strategy.
Exactly. And that constant adaptation,
Wow.
that's what makes this field so dynamic and so fascinating.
I have to say, I'm blown away by the level of sophistication and coordination that's involved in all of this.
It really is impressive.
Keeping airports safe from wildlife hazards.
It's a real testament to the dedication and expertise of the people working behind the scenes.
Right.
To make sure that air travel remains one of the safest forms of transportation.
And it's also a great reminder that even seemingly ordinary things, like the birds flying overhead, can have a significant impact on something as complex as aviation.
Absolutely.
Well, it's been a truly eye-opening deep dive.
I'm glad to hear that.
I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the complexities of airport operations.
It's been a pleasure sharing this journey with you and our listeners.
And to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this exploration of airport wildlife hazard management. Who knew there was so much to learn about keeping birds and planes from having an unplanned meeting? Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies, but maybe not too closely.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It's amazing to see how technology is being used to improve airport safety in these ways.
It really is.
Yeah.
But all of this technology is only effective if the information is communicated clearly
All right.
and efficiently to everyone who needs it.
Right, because you've got air traffic controllers, pilots, wildlife control personnel. All of these people need to be on the same page.
Absolutely, yeah. And to make sure everyone has the information they need, airports use a multi-layered communication system.
Okay.
One of the key elements is what we call the ATIS,
AT.
or the Automatic Terminal Information Service.
Okay.
And this is a continuous broadcast of essential information,
Okay.
including any reported wildlife hazards.
So pilots are getting real-time updates even before they take off.
That's right.
Yeah.
It keeps them informed about any potential issues they might encounter during their flight. And then there are NOTAMs, or notices to airmen.
NOTAMs.
Yeah, which are more detailed warnings about persistent hazards, like ongoing construction or a known bird nesting area, that sort of thing.
So the ATIS is for immediate updates, and NOTAMs are more for longer-term advisories.
Got it. And then, of course, there are pilot reports. Pilots have this unique perspective from the air.
Right.
And if they see something concerning, they can report it immediately to air traffic control.
It sounds like a really collaborative effort with everyone playing a role in keeping the skies safe.
It really is.
Yeah.
And all of this information that's gathered, from all these different sources.
Yeah.
Well, that's where the analysis comes in.
Right.
All of that data from the satellites, GIS, radar cameras, pilot reports.
Right.
All of it is constantly being analyzed and used to update the airport's wildlife hazard management program.
So it's like a continuous cycle of monitoring, assessing, and adjusting their strategies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that constant adaptation.
Wow.
That's what makes this field so dynamic and so fascinating.
I have to say, I'm blown away by the level of sophistication and coordination that's involved in all of this.
It really is impressive.
Keeping airports safe from wildlife hazards.
It's a real testament to the dedication and expertise of the people working behind the scenes.
Right.
To make sure that air travel remains one of the safest forms of transportation.
And it's also a great reminder that even seemingly ordinary things like the birds flying overhead can have a significant impact on something as complex as aviation.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's been a truly eye-opening deep dive.
I'm glad to hear that.
I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the complexities of airport operations.
It's been a pleasure sharing this journey with you and our listeners.
And to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this exploration of airport wildlife hazard management. Who knew there was so much to learn about keeping birds and planes from having an unplanned meeting? Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies, but maybe not too closely. It really makes you think, doesn't it? All the work that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Every time we hop on a plane, we just sort of take it for granted that we can fly,
Right.
thousands of miles through the air and be safe.
Mm-hmm.
But it's thanks to,
A lot of people.
yeah, a lot of planning, a lot of vigilance, a lot of expertise that makes it possible.
Absolutely. It's a real testament to human ingenuity, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure.
And our ability to kind of adapt to these really complex challenges.
Right.
I mean, we've come such a long way from those early days of aviation when, bird strikes were this relatively unknown phenomenon.
Right.
And today we have this whole system in place, this amazing combination of science and technology and human expertise,
Yeah.
all working together to try to minimize these risks.
And it's not just about protecting the aircraft and the passengers.
Right.
It's about protecting wildlife and their habitats, too.
Absolutely. Striking that balance, finding ways to ensure safety without causing unnecessary harm to animals, that's a key part of the equation. It's a challenge that requires, constant research, innovation, and really careful ethical considerations.
Speaking of ethical considerations, I'm curious to get your perspective on the use of lethal control.
Yeah?
It's understandable that it's sometimes necessary, especially when it comes to protecting human life.
Right.
But it's always such a sensitive topic.
It is. It's a really complex issue. And as we've been talking about, lethal control is always a last resort.
Right.
It's only used when other methods have failed. And the risk to aircraft is just deemed too high. But even then, it's done under very strict regulations and always with the goal of minimizing suffering.
So there's a lot of thought and care that goes into making those decisions.
A lot. It's not something that anyone takes lightly.
Right.
And it's important to remember that every situation is unique.
Right.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach to wildlife management.
So it's really about weighing the risks and benefits.
Exactly.
And trying to come up with the best possible solution for each specific situation.
Precisely. And that's why, that constant monitoring, that data analysis that we were talking about,
Right.
that's so crucial. The more we can learn about wildlife behavior, the more we can understand those factors that contribute to these strikes, the better equipped we are to prevent them from happening.
It's a really fascinating example of how we can apply science and technology to solve these real-world problems.
Absolutely.
So, for our listeners out there who might be thinking, okay, this is all very interesting, but what does it have to do with me? What would you say to them?
I would say, even if you never set foot on a runway yourself, you still benefit from the work that goes into airport wildlife hazard management.
Right.
It's about keeping those skies safe for everyone. Whether you're a frequent flyer, a pilot, or just someone who, enjoys watching planes take off and land.
It's a reminder that there are all these dedicated people working behind the scenes to keep us safe, often in ways we don't even realize.
Exactly. And it's a great example of how all these seemingly unconnected fields, biology, engineering, data analysis, all of them.
They all come together.
They come together to address these complex challenges that face us.
Well, it's been a truly enlightening deep dive. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I feel like we've all gained a whole new appreciation for the complexities of airport operations and
Me too.
all the work that goes on behind the scenes to make sure that we can travel safely.
It's been a pleasure sharing this journey with you and all of our listeners out there.
Yes, and to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive with us into airport wildlife hazard management. It's a reminder that there's always more to learn, even about the things that we think we already know. So next time you're at the airport, take a moment, think about that unseen world of wildlife management.
Yeah, all the things happen.
That's helping to keep your flight safe.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, happy travels, everyone.